The Abomination of Desolation did not happen in 70 AD, and I'll tell you why. Matthew 24:15 says, "So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand." So this tells us first and foremost that we must look at the book of Daniel in order to understand what the abomination of desolation is. Now, as you read Daniel chapters 7 through 12, you will quickly realize that there are themes repeated in the book of Revelation related to the Antichrist, to the period of 3.5 years, to the Great Tribulation, and ultimately to the return of Christ and the resurrection of the dead. So any interpretation of the abomination of desolation that's separate from the book of Daniel and Revelation is automatically wrong. We also get even more information about the end times through the book of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. So it's absolutely critical to synthesize all of the information that we have about the end times instead of isolating and proof texting passages. Whether they mean to or not, many people claiming that the abomination of desolation is a past event ends up ignoring about 90% of the other biblical prophecies that did not come to pass in 70 AD. But we can't cherry pick that way. If we do see similarities between events in the past and prophesied future events, that means that it's a foreshadow, not a fulfillment. Bible prophecy is a lot like a puzzle where there's different pieces spread throughout different books of the Bible. But once you put them all together, it becomes really clear that there is a primary Antichrist figure at the end of history. We get a lot of details about him in the book of Daniel and Revelation. For example, we find out that there are 10 world leaders that give him their power and authority. We also find out that the dragon Satan gives his throne and authority to the Antichrist. Now, this leader has many names throughout the Bible. We have the man of lawlessness, the son of perdition, the beast, the willful king, a prince, and the most famous title is the Antichrist. But he's not your run-of-the-mill world leader. We find out that he actually has supernatural lying signs, wonders, and miracles that he does in order to deceive the world. And we also find out that this person will declare himself to be God and demand that the world worship him. We also find out that he has a monetary system called the mark of the beast that's required to buy or sell. And we find out that he has an image of the beast that actually can talk. And there's the false prophet that is pointing people towards the Antichrist and convincing them to worship him. So when we look back at the season between 66 AD and 70 AD, there is nobody that meets any of those descriptions. Were there some really mean bad guys? Yes. But even a character like Nero did not meet the biblical qualifications to be the beast in Revelation. One of the clearest signs that we'll have that's going to reveal the Antichrist is that this person will stand in God's temple and declare himself to be God. And throughout the book of Daniel, the context is Jerusalem centered. So this won't be a pagan anywhere in the world standing in a temple proclaiming himself to be God. This needs to be in the context of Jerusalem. This leader also ends up interrupting the Old Testament system of sacrifices. It says clearly throughout the book of Daniel that this person will put a stop to the sacrifices. And he's going to divert worship from Yahweh to himself and essentially say, now it's your turn to worship me, because he's placing himself above all gods. That's the significance of him placing himself in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. So again, this is not something that Nero ever did. He didn't go to the Jerusalem temple, stand in the holies of holies, declare himself to be God, and stop the sacrifices in his lifetime. In fact, he actually died before 70 AD. Some people have talked about Titus or Vespasian, but again, neither of those leaders stood in the Jerusalem temple and proclaimed themselves to be God and set up an idolatrous image and demanded that people worship them. So any similarities we see are actually foreshadows, not full fulfillments. There's also really clear timing requirements that nobody fulfilled in 70 AD. Daniel 9:27 shows that there is a final 7-year period where the covenant is confirmed with Israel. Some people even call this a treaty. But during the middle of the final 7 years, the covenant is broken, the sacrifices are stopped, and the abomination of desolation is set up. It's very clear in the Amplified, so I'll read that. It says, "And he will enter into a binding and irrevocable unbreakable covenant with many for 1 week, 7 years, but in the middle of the week he will stop the sacrifice and grain offering for the remaining 3½ years, and on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until the complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who causes the horror. So that gives us a time period of 3½ years where the abomination of desolation is set up. And interestingly enough, we get an extra 30 days mentioned in Daniel 12:11. It says, from the time the daily sacrifice is abolished and the abomination that causes desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. This matters because whatever the abomination of desolation is will be in the temple for that specified time period. Now, a lot of people, whether they're preterist or other denominations that say the abomination of desolation already happened, they will have a tendency to pick events that don't fit within this time period. Matthew 24 actually shows us that the abomination of desolation is the start of the Great Tribulation, and it says, when you see, flee. So when people say, for example, that the destruction of the temple is the abomination of desolation, well, that happened all the way in 70 AD, which is the end of this time period of destruction. So if Christians waited to see the temple being destroyed, for example, it would already be too late for them to flee anywhere. So the destruction of the temple in 70 AD can't be the abomination of desolation. Other people look at Luke 21:20 and say that Jerusalem being surrounded by armies is the abomination of desolation. But if you look closely, that's not what the passage is saying. Luke 21:20 says, when you see Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, you will know that its desolation is near. So Luke 21:20 doesn't undo all of the abomination of desolation passages in Daniel 7-12. It doesn't undo what we see in Revelation 13 or 2 Thessalonians 2. We're supposed to put all of these pieces together, not use one piece to replace 10 other pieces. And unfortunately, that's what people are doing when they redefine the abomination of desolation as the armies surrounding Jerusalem or even the destruction of Jerusalem. That's not what the text is saying. And again, the timing doesn't quite line up. The first time that Jerusalem was surrounded by armies was in 66 AD, and then they fell back and they came back later. So the timing doesn't quite line up with what we see in Daniel. Now, a lot of people will point to the fact that there are a lot of similarities in Luke 21:20 and what happened with the early Christians in Jerusalem. They did in fact end up fleeing before the destruction of the temple and the city. But the details are just a little bit different than what we see in the Gospels. History reports that somebody actually got a prophetic revelation telling them to flee the city. And it was confirmed by the elders in the church. They listened and they left. Now here's where it differs a bit. Matthew 24:16 says, let those that are in Judea flee to the mountains. Well, the early church Christians actually fled to Pella, and getting there required a 3,000-foot descent instead of going up to the hills. So even though there's a lot of similarities and foreshadowing, it's not the exact prophecies that we see in the Gospels. Now, the biggest way we can tell that the abomination of desolation wasn't fulfilled in 70 AD is the fact that Jesus said after that period of tribulation that's discussed in Daniel and Revelation, Jesus himself would return, every eye would see him, his coming would be like the lightning, his elect would be gathered, the nations would be mourning, kings would be hiding under rocks. You guys know all the verses. That did not happen in 70 AD. Now, a lot of people that will say that the abomination of desolation happened in 70 AD will also say that Jesus returned in 70 AD, but they will say that he came in judgment. But again, that's not what Matthew 24 is saying. There's a visible bodily presence of Jesus Christ returning to the earth. And I'd encourage you to check out Matthew 24:29-31 and 2 Thessalonians 2:1-4 for more details. So this is just scratching the surface, but hopefully you can see that the abomination of desolation did not get fulfilled in 70 AD, although there were many foreshadows. God bless you guys.